For an anthology show, What If feels surprisingly serialized. Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is Emcee Frodis. Marvel's What If just finished its second season, with 9 episodes dropping daily over the Christmas season. We're going to be looking at all of the multiversal traversing. But before we get into that, thank you to my wonderful Patreons at the cheerleader level. Stephanie Strauss, Alicia Brown, Stephen Hill, Jalasso, Spotted Giraffe, Mayray Vokaya, and Riker Tattoo. You guys are fantastic and help me keep the show going. If you want to support me and my videos, please join these guys over on my Patreon. Also, make sure to subscribe to my channel and give this video a like. Like its animated counterpart, the What If comics is an anthology exploring how paths could have diverged if one different choice was made. It's been published sporadically since 1977. The inaugural season of the cartoon series was received with pretty consistently favorable reviews. Myself, I enjoyed it quite a bit, with What If T'Challa became Star-Lord, What If Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands, and What If Zombies being my standout episodes. The finale, which brought together the characters from almost every previously visited universe, gave a nice sense of purpose to the show. There were criticisms leveled against the first season, mostly about the animation style, and that the show didn't get super inventive with the execution of the concept. The first point doesn't really bother me. I don't think that this is a bad style for what they're trying to accomplish. But the second, yeah, that's totally fair. There was a reluctance to move past the confines of the movies, with a specific emphasis on Phase 1 heroes, who are already very well-covered territory. Season 2 was, I would say, a bit more uneven than the first, and that might be a bit generous. Marvel has an incredible back catalog of characters and situations that they could explore, but they do seem to hit a lot of the same notes. First, I want to talk about the episodes I really loved this season. The first episode, What If Nebula Joined the Nova Corps, was incredible. A dark noir in the style of Blade Runner. It gave me hope that the writers had taken the criticisms of inventiveness to heart. It had a wonderfully different feel to any of the Marvel movies. Rather than just being a small point of divergence, an entirely new genre was able to be explored. Karen Gillan did a fabulous job with a hard-boiled detective narration, and the visuals just really worked for me. Episode 2, What If Peter Quill Attacked Earth's Mightiest Heroes, was again a pretty inventive concept because it didn't focus on the headlining heroes of the MCU, instead utilizing mentors and parental figures owing to the 1980s setting. This allowed for the exploration of characters who are less established, allowing for a different dynamic that was refreshing. The Christmas episode, What If Happy Hogan Saved Christmas, is so stupid. Just so stupid. But in the best holiday special way, it is a loving tribute to Die Hard and might actually be my favorite parody of the movie. I am far more likely to watch this episode at Christmas time than I am to watch actual Die Hard. I actually watched this twice on Christmas. It was just a lot of silly fun. What If Kahori Reshaped the World is an interesting episode that I think, of all of the episodes, will have an impact for the MCU going forward. Kahori is the first entirely new character to be focused on in a What If episode. At first, I was a bit confused as to why we would take an episode of a show about divergence and stories that we already know to explore and a completely new character who probably they could have found a way to fit into the regular 616 universe. But I think that this is part of the long game with Marvel in terms of their multiversal saga. Kahori is a character that I have no doubt will turn up in the live action as part of Secret Wars, so that not every character from a different dimension is just a fan service reprisal from outside of the MCU movies. Kahori is an attempt to widen the scope. Marvel also took great time and effort to appropriately portray a character from the Mohawk Nation, even having the entire episode be done in the Mohawk language. It is really refreshing for actual effort to be spent on proper representation, something Marvel has had a very spotty record of in the past. What If Hela Found the Ten Rings was, like the Peter Quill Attacks episode, a great look at the past of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, being set well before the birth of any of our heroes. It allowed for a much deeper look at Hela, who was one of the more interesting Marvel villains. And while Odin has been treated pretty favorably by the movies themselves, the fans have always known he was a really shit parent, so it was nice to see that reflected finally. So 5 episodes met with my resounding approval. Sounds good, right? I mean, that's more than half. 55% good, in fact. So I suppose it comes down to just how I felt about the other 4 episodes. Yeah, we might be in a bit of trouble here. What If Iron Man Crashed into the Grandmaster is a holdover from the first season, unfinished because of COVID, I guess. Which, to be honest, I don't really understand how that works, especially with animation, and I think it might be an excuse. I think that they didn't think this was a strong enough episode, and they tried to work on it. And when they were finished it still wasn't a strong episode, so they released it as the Christmas Day episode, thinking people would be too busy with the holiday to really comment on it. It is not a strong episode in the least. I keep seeing people comparing it to Mad Max Fury Road, but I was getting way more Wacky Races vibes. They were also trying really hard to capture the humor of Thor Ragnarok, but I think that movie was singular in its use of humor. They couldn't even capture it for the next Thor movie, let alone this. And no offense to Cynthia McWilliams, but I don't think she sounds very much like Zoe Saldana. I find this very upsetting because the voice actors they've gotten for the other sound-alikes do a pretty good job, and everyone knows how I feel about Zoe Saldana. But this episode was relatively inoffensive to me. It was just sort of whatever. But the last 3 episodes, yeah, this is where the problems of the season lay for me. First, we start off with What If Captain Carter Fought the Hydra Stomper? It was the best of these 3 episodes for me. It did a good job of separating itself from the Winter Soldier by having Hydra have been defeated back in the 50s and then veering more into a Black Widow territory. This was a nice touch. It showed that even after Captain Carter disappeared, the changes in the timeline remained. My biggest issue with this episode is that Utau says he rarely does sequels, but I think this is something he should have stuck with. Believe me, I liked the Captain Carter episode in the first season, but the creative team has decided to go hard on her, and I find that a bit irritating. They already got a lot of good use out of Captain Carter in the first season as the inaugural episode, then as a member of the Guardians of the Multiverse, and even bringing her back into the Illuminati in Multiverse of Madness. But I don't feel like this character is differentiated enough from Captain America to really justify the use. It feels like the same story we've already seen, except with the gender of the characters reversed. The finale really falls completely apart for me, and I think might be the worst episode of the entire series, except for the Thor in Las Vegas episode. I can see how they were trying to recapture the excitement of the Guardians of the Multiverse fighting against Infinity Ultron, but yikes, did this not work for me. First of all, why the hell did you have that line from The Watcher in the Captain Carter episode about not doing sequels, when this was yet another sequel to actually, 3 different episodes? It also speaks incredibly poorly of The Watcher that he couldn't see what Strange Supreme was doing. In the finale of Season 1, Strange Supreme was entrusted with the protection of 2 potential multiverse destroyers. You didn't want to keep an eye on him there, Watcher? What he was doing wasn't a small thing. I think this episode also misses what makes What If work. It's a half-hour show exploring the vast possibilities of the multiverse. The best episodes of it are much more character-focused because it's how people react that creates the ripples. But this episode had Strange Supreme losing any character development from Season 1 and deciding to do nefarious deeds that are just very ill-defined. Like, what is this engine thing doing? He's going to feed these powerful beings into it and just How does this work to bring his dimension back? Like, what is going on? How does this work? How did Kahori manage to find out everything about it before she escaped? How did Kahori learn English? Instead of exploring any of this stuff, it's Kahori and Captain Carter running around and shooting energy beams at Strange Supreme. It was remarkably boring. Then they get power-ups from Infinity Stones and Mjolnir and Hela's helmet and countless other weapons, but it's still just shooting beams at each other, and I checked right out on it. What If the Watcher Broke His Oath was not one of my favorite episodes in Season 1, for a lot of the same reasons as this one, but at least it felt more like the culmination of the season. Meanwhile, this came completely out of nowhere. There was no build-up to what Strange Supreme was doing, even though there was opportunity to, as characters from most of the episodes of this season ended up being abducted by Strange Supreme. So I talked about the finale before the penultimate episode. I just needed to give that episode a bit of room to breathe, because just to warn you, this is going to turn into an epic rant. Marvel 1602 is not only one of my favorite comics of all time, it is what I consider to be one of the best alternate universes in all of media. The Neil Gaiman story is not only well written, but it understands both the characters and the historical period in which it is set. I know I'm going to sound overdramatic and negative by saying this, but I'm a YouTuber. It's kind of what we do. This episode absolutely butchers 1602. I mean, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised by that, considering Neil Gaiman found out What If was doing an episode based on it from fucking Twitter, rather than from Marvel and receiving appropriate credit and compensation for his work. Not that this is a new problem from Marvel. They've been dicking over the writers of every single comic they've pulled from, if their last name isn't Lee, for ages now. Everything about this episode, aside from the year as the reason for the incursion, is divorced from the original comic. The only reason to use the year 1602 is to trade off the name of Neil Gaiman's story, which makes it even more galling that he wasn't credited. And this could have been any year, because certainly the writers treated it like it was any year. And I'm not going to be going with the excuse of two universes are collapsing in on each other, so things are coming in from other time periods, as I've seen other people try to explain it, because that's not what's supposed to be happening. Steve Rogers ends up in the past, and this causes the time of heroes to begin 400 years early. Neil Gaiman used very specific events from that time period, down to specific years, in the transition from the Elizabethan era to the Jacobean era to set the story. It plays a part in things. The Nick Fury and Stephen Strange of 1602 are even based on actual people who existed in Queen Elizabeth's court, Sir Francis Walsingham and John Dee. Virginia Dare from the Roanoke colony plays a part because her history is directly changed by the incursion. The history mattered. It is our historical world, just with superheroes in it. Meanwhile, in What If 1602, it's just kind of vaguely old-timey. Literally the only thing that places it as the 1600s is Loki performing Shakespeare. But even then, Loki goes on a lot about Othello, even though that wasn't written until most likely 1603 and wasn't performed until 1604. And I really hope Tom Hiddleston was a good little Shakespearean nerd and protested about Loki holding Yorick's skull during Hamlet's nunnery scene soliloquy 2 whole acts before Yorick is supposed to be dug up. Yeah, don't mess with an English major who did most of her study on British literature. But more importantly, your main plot of the story involves Roger's hood. Roger's hood. Seriously. Listen, I get not doing Rojas because Steve Rogers, as a white, vaguely tribed Indian, was problematic when 1602 came out, let alone one episode after introducing Kahori into the MCU. But portraying him as a Robin Hood figure during the Elizabethan era, Lord help me. Robin Hood stories first appeared 200 years earlier, and Robin Hood, as a historical figure, if he existed, which he didn't, was supposed to have existed during the 12th century, 400 years before 1602, meaning that there's basically as much time separating Robin Hood from 1602 as there is 1602 from our time period. Then you throw in Wanda Merlin. Merlin was 5th or 6th century. Scott Lang talks about Victoria sponges, which wasn't invented until 1843, which being named after Queen Victoria might have been a hint. The man in the Iron Mask was arrested in 1669 and was also in France. So what is going on? Okay, I will try to calm myself down now. I could forgive these anachronisms if they'd actually done an interesting story. But as it is, it's basically just an Errol Flynn Robin Hood adventure with Marvel heroes. And they are just the Marvel heroes. There's nothing that makes them particularly Elizabethan. In fact, they're very much not Elizabethan, just acting like they normally do, just happen to be located in the past. Meanwhile, the characters from the comic 1602 were evocative of the modern-day Marvel heroes, but generally acted appropriate to the era. Characters gained their powers through what seemed like mystical means rather than technology. That's why Iron Man doesn't appear in the 1602 universe until the sequels, which were not written by Gaiman, and were pretty inferior to the original, because you can't explain Iron Man existing within that setting. The characters in the comic 1602 aren't just our characters wearing Ren Fair costumes. They are actual other characters, which is a plot point brought up by the Nicholas Fury of that universe. In 1602, you have the X-Men being called witch breeds, not even being called mutants because the term didn't exist at the time, being hunted by the Spanish Inquisition. Matthew Murdock is a spy masquerading as a blind minstrel. The Fantastic Four are seafarers who became the embodiment of the elements by sailing through a mist on the ocean. Meanwhile, in this, you have Ant-Man transforming with absolutely no explanation, along with a whole group of Yellow Jackets, and Tony is able to build a machine to be able to figure out who the Forerunner is. This feels so lazy and bland. The original comic is very focused on character interactions, weaving together this world we're unfamiliar with. Meanwhile, the story is completely focused on a character the audience is already incredibly familiar with because she's basically the mascot of the show, having appeared in like 4 episodes before this. In both comics and animation, the 1602 universe is dying because of a Forerunner causing an incursion. But the difference is in the comics, none of the characters are super aware of it. Like, some of them have a vaguely disquieted feeling, but Stephen Strange is the only one who really knows what's going on because of an intervention by the Watcher. But even the Watcher is pushed to the background of this in favor of Captain Carter, and we hit the same beats over and over again about Peggy and Steve longing for each other. This world also just lacks the general disquiet of the comic 1602 universe. Everything is so over the top and over dramatic, and it's just really unappealing. Not to mention, all of the characters are incredibly stupid. What was the point of bringing Captain Carter into the past? King Thor turns on her right away, just to turn it into a by-the-numbers escape from the evil royals plot. Why, out of everyone in the multiverse, would Wanda Merlin think Captain Carter was best suited for the job? I mean, she pretty well sucks at it, and it's a little understandable why King Thor was mad at her. Roger's hood also makes no sense, even outside of Robin Hood being a terrible reference for this era. Steve Rogers in the original 1602 is the bad guy. He fully knows that he's not meant to be in this time. He eventually knows that he is causing harm to the world by being there, but he doesn't care, because this Steve Rogers comes from a bad future where he has experienced a despair event horizon. He has lost faith in everything he believes in, and the only thing he can hold on to is the protection of Virginia Dare, who he sees as the embodiment of America. This Steve Rogers is a broken man. And the Steve Rogers in animation also knows he's the Forerunner, but he does fuck all. We are given every indication that his world was exactly the same as the 616 world up until the moment Steve hit the time stone. So we're supposed to believe that our Steve Rogers would be willing to risk an entire universe just so he could play Robin Hood? They could have at least had it made sense. They could have made it a world where Maid Margaret was still alive and happy with him, which would have made sense, even if I do hate the whole Robin Hood vibe, and I would also judge the fuck out of Steve, but it would have at least been somewhat understandable based on his characterization as obsessively in love with Peggy. The original 1602 story is gutted by basically none of the important characters being present in it, aside from Nick Fury. Instead, they pull the same old tired characters they usually trot out. And I know what you might be thinking. Emcee, are you sure that the writers weren't just pulling from the characters that they currently had available in the MCU? Well, let's look at the important characters in 1602. Stephen Strange, Clea, Peter Parker, Reed Richards, Matthew Murdock, Charles Xavier, Natasha Romanoff, and Pietro Maximoff. There are plenty of characters existing in the MCU who are major characters within 1602. What If just didn't want to use them, and the few that they did use, they used incredibly poorly. Why did you have Bruce Banner as the Man in the Iron Mask instead of as the assistant to the King, which is what his position was in the book, and instead you give that to Happy Hogan, who is basically a version of the Hulk anyways? And why? Why Wanda Merlin? Like, I mean, I get that it would be hard to do a whole Spanish Inquisition story, especially without Magneto. But I mean, if you don't want the witch breeds in it, fine, the X-Men can be left out. You can even get away with not using the Fantastic Four because they do come in very late in the story. But there is absolutely no reason not to use Stephen Strange, Peter Parker, and Natasha Romanoff, seeing as they are massively important characters in 1602 and the MCU, and they've already all been used within What If. I don't require a perfect one-to-one adaptation of something, despite what you might think from my rantings here. I'm a big fan of Marvel Zombies, yet I had no problem with What If Zombies being so different from the original material. Part of this is because a zombie apocalypse is such a generic alternate universe. It was also just a much better story than the one they came up with for 1602. I am excited about there being a spin-off of the Marvel Zombies universe. Meanwhile, Neil Gaiman has been trying to sell Marvel on the idea of a 1602 series for years, and they've turned him down, saying that there wasn't any interest in it. And now they've used his work, uncredited and uncompensated, to produce this pale fucking imitation, trading off of his name and his art, but not appreciating the artistry of it. Instead, Marvel has turned it into yet another vehicle for Captain Carter, a character that if they want to use so damn much, they should take her out of the anthology that is supposed to be about infinite possibilities and just give her her own damn spin-off. I want What If to be able to explore the vast variation of the multiverse, not continually go back to the same fucking character. As it is, she spoiled what will probably be the only adaptation I ever see of one of my favorite comics of all time. Despite spending so much time ranting about the insistence on Captain Carter, I did generally enjoy What If Season 2, and I look forward to Season 3. The stories I liked, I really liked. It's just the stories that I didn't like, I fucking hated. I just really feel like Marvel has to be more creative and unafraid to explore the possibilities of endless possibilities. And if they're going to trade off of someone's work, at least respect the art and the artist who created them. So comment down below with your thought on Marvel What If Season 2. What were your favorite episodes? Am I completely off base about my rant about 1602? If you like my videos, subscribe to my channel. I do videos about Buffy, Doctor Who, Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars, and lots of other geeky things. If you like my Star Trek content, please check me out on Strange New Pod. We go live Thursdays on YouTube at 9:30 Eastern. If you want to support me, please visit my Patreon. You can also buy me a coffee or visit my TeePublic and Redbubble. You can find me on all platforms, as well as most social media, as Emcee Frodis. So until next time, live long and may the Force be with you.